And so what happens when and I think about this, what becomes of us? What happens when we no longer have meat to eat? We are quite spoiled, I think, as human beings. We're used to having whatever we want pretty much. And so now in this post-apocalyptic reality, that is not the case. We can't have everything we want now. And so what do we become? What do we do? And 40 acres gives us one idea of what we can potentially become when that happens.
Hello, and welcome to the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Chasen, and like always, I'll be joined today by the team that brings you cupofteacritiques.com. Here, we'll dive into the productions and topics we broach on our website so you can decide for yourself if they're your cup of tea. Ready for a deep look with a deep brew? This week's topic, post-apocalyptic films. Cup of Tea Critiques is a family affair, and I'm here with my brother Chris, my mother Reba, and my father Terry. And fam, how did we end up landing on this topic anyways?
Your dad and I went to see 40 Acres, a post-apocalyptic film. So all the animals contracted a virus, and so people can't eat meat. There are no animals for people to eat meat. People are living off of whatever they can grow. But there's a segment of people that have decided they still want meat. And so they become cannibals and they're hunting people, which when you think about it is human beings' biggest fear is being hunted by other people.
Y'all left a messy trail, so make no mistake about it. They're looking for us. But what matters now is how we react.
Rain, you're on inventory. We need a full count of reserves. Medicine, ammo.
Yes, sir.
Cookie, keep an eye on those monitors. Manny, you, Haley, and I take inner perimeter.
How did they find the depot?
How they find anything? Other people. Watch your six. Shoot first, don't ask questions. We ain't waiting on no revenge. They gonna end up dead any damn way. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
I think Brandon mentioned this as a matter of fact in the Jaws segment, that our biggest fear is falling from the top of the food chain. And I think 40 Acres is a good example of that happening. What I like so much about 40 Acres, as I said in the review as well, is I think 40 Acres it's a plausible story. It's a highly plausible story. We've had mad cow disease, for example, and while 40 Acres didn't address fowl being infected, we have had bird flu most recently. Eggs have been affected. Chicken has been affected. And so our food supply has been compromised by disease. And so it seems to me that it is a real possibility that we could indeed at some point not have animals to eat. And so people would have to resort to living off the land. And so what happens when and I think about this, what becomes of us? What happens when we no longer have meat to eat? We are quite spoiled, I think, as human beings. We're used to having whatever we want pretty much. And so now in this post-apocalyptic reality, that is not the case. We can't have everything we want now. And so what do we become? What do we do? And 40 Acres gives us one idea of what we can potentially become when that happens. I don't think that's true with most post-apocalyptic films. I'm not sure how close to realistic they are.
I mean, I guess one could argue they're all realistic in the sense that we don't really know if an apocalypse is realistic, then anything that happens after that technically could be, right? I mean, I guess we don't know what a post-apocalyptic world looks like yet, so anything could technically happen, right?
Yeah, I agree anything can technically happen, but what hints are there in our present reality that something uh, could happen in a post-apocalyptic reality?
Okay,
You
that's
know,
interesting. So maybe that's the because I'm always thinking about like what makes for whatever genre we're talking about. I'm like, what makes for a good whatever of that genre? And so maybe for post-apocalyptic movies, it's just it does it include some element of contemporary societies or some social issue that's of the moment that is exaggerated for the purpose of the movie.
yes,
Hmm.
yes. To me, that's where, to me, as an audience member, that's where you get my buy-in.
Okay.
And so if they're trying to sell this idea to people, if they're trying to sell this idea to the audience, to me, that is how they have to do it. It has to be a relatable idea. And so that's why I think, the 40 Acres story was just so incredibly effective. So when I see, I like World War Z, for example,
Mhm.
might be described as a post-apocalyptic film, but those are zombies.
Mhm.
I mean, how realistic is that? I mean, what in our present reality suggests that zombies exist? It seems ridiculous, to use your word, Chris.
It's too loud. It's too loud. Coming over the top!
And it seems ridiculous, but maybe I'm naive about that. Maybe you all need to school me on that.
They did
I'll
have a
say-
premise as to what brought about this, right? I mean, there was at least a somewhat plausible explanation
For
What are you talking
what?
about?
for World War Z.
World is plagued
Yeah.
by mysterious infection, turning whole human populations
Mhm.
into rampaging, mindless zombies. Yeah, see, that doesn't work.
I want to respond to a
Okay.
bit of what Mom's saying here with this. Zombies, I mean, anytime you hear the word zombie, it feels like it always is followed by the word apocalypse. So it naturally is a post-apocalyptic. It falls in that category. However, we look at it as zombies first, and therefore it's already got its own category. Whereas what I think Mom's talking about with 40 Acres, that's more realistic. It is like, what will we truly do when we reach this point?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of 40 acres, to your mother's point, it's believable in that you could have a situation where animals are eliminated. The food supply is eliminated, and it is conceivable that there are people that eat people. We know they already have people that eat people. So it's not that far of a stretch in terms of, okay, we don't want to farm. We just want to go around eating people because we still like meat.
With a nice
Well, they're
Chianti.
also doing it out of desperation too. So
Well, yeah,
it's not necessarily that they began as cannibals, that they began as crazy, but out of desperation, they just lost their minds. And boy,
desperation
did they lose
and
their
or
minds.
laziness is you
Yeah,
kinda
that's
into
fair.
it, you know.
That's fair. Yeah, absolutely.
But
I
that
guess I shouldn't
desperation
say-
can make you mindless, could it
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, they're not mindless. They know exactly what they're doing.
40 Acres was just a way to segue into a discussion about post-apocalyptic films. Well, one, what are they? Number two, how can you sell a post-apocalyptic film, for example, to an audience? What is it that makes it realistic? I mean, what makes a good post-apocalyptic film, for example?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, do they have to be realistic? Maybe, maybe not. I think some of the better ones are a little more believable in terms of this could happen. Although I wasn't really impressed a whole lot with the movie, The Day After Tomorrow was one of those.
Okay.
Because that one was a weather-related one.
Yep.
Yeah. I think mom is saying her idea of a good, a quality post-apocalyptic film, or at least one with a hook, is a conceivable premise based on something that is already an issue. I would say, to me, and you don't necessarily know this from how it's marketed, but I find it interesting to see how people are getting along in this post-apocalyptic world. How do power structures still form? How do people, how are people still interacting even when kind of civilized society is broken down? So I find it more interesting the communities that form or don't form, or the conflict that kind of ensues from that, as opposed to people kind of wandering around desolate spaces waiting to be attacked, essentially. Just to give some examples, last year, A Quiet Place, the third A Quiet Place movie came out, and it's even though that one doesn't necessarily completely have a community, really, it more so becomes about the two main characters and how they bond, and when they become separated and they're trying to keep each other safe and make it out alive. And so it kind of becomes about their bond and how they start out as strangers and how they end up bonding.
Stop the vote! Stop the vote!
Another one, this is more in the indie vein, I would say, Biosphere, which was a movie starring Sterling K. Brown and Mark Duplass, that came out, I think, maybe 2 years ago at this point. But that's kind of a post-apocalyptic movie where they're just living in this sphere, and it kind of ends up raising these questions about biology and adaptation. Does the human species adapt to how does the human species adapt to stay alive, basically? But it's mostly just kind of, it kind of presents as this buddy comedy, and it becomes a little more scientific in its in its premise. And that's it's not based on action. There's really no action in it at all, but that's a post-apocalyptic movie that kind of took a different route. Another one, I haven't seen this one, full disclosure, but Snowpiercer is considered, is, a lot of people really like that movie, and it's about survivors on a train and how they start to bicker, and how they start the conflict that arises between them. That's not based on monsters or anything in the outside world. So those are three movies where I would kind of look at just what's the human interaction in this post-apocalyptic world. That, to me, is what makes it more intriguing than anything.
Yeah, I want to see both the movie and there's a series as well.
Yeah.
I want to see both of those.
Yeah, I have an interest in both of those as well. Another one, Dad, you mentioned the day after tomorrow. 2012 came out in 2009. And that's another one that seemed to be like a series of catastrophic events that are leading to, as it says here, to annihilate mankind. That one was starring John Cusack, and I apologize if I butcher this, but Chiwetel Ejiofor. I'd never know how to properly pronounce his name, but he always does a magnificent job in anything I see him in.
Target elevation, 29,035 feet.
29,000 feet? What the hell is it, 29,000 feet?
We're headed straight for the north face of Mount Everest, Mr. Anheuser. And if we can't start our engines, we will not survive the impact.
2012, I saw bits and pieces of that. I didn't get a chance to actually sit down and watch the whole thing. But what I remember from it was this kind of hierarchy to set up the submarines that were supposed to save everybody. And it was all based on money. So it always seemed like, Chris, you're talking about how they set up these systems or whatever. It always seems to start with who's the richest. They're the ones worth saving. And that's kind of what this movie really touched on. I'll give you another one, Knowing, which starred Nicolas Cage, where it was basically like this mathematician that realized that the end of the world was coming based off of a series of a bunch of events. And what was interesting was that movie is set up to show us what happens leading into the apocalypse. A little bit different than the other ones, in my opinion. Just, what if you are the person that can see the signs, read that they're coming, and then would we as a society even be willing to listen to that person, or would we ignore them and shun them to the side and end up setting up our own annihilation, set up our own demise? So that one intrigued me from that perspective.
Do you think are there any movies that wouldn't typically be called post-apocalyptic that you might consider that way? Like how much does a universe actually matter in contrast to what we're seeing on screen? Because there are movies where we're kind of in a character's head or in a psyche or in this kind of dreamlike state that they're in when they're feeling disoriented or in a strange part of their life. Could you make the argument that it's a post-apocalyptic movie just to see a character removed from the universe, even if it's still existing, right? Like the first one that comes to mind, I would say, is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. So I mean, it's been a minute since I watched it, but it's basically a guy's a post lost love. Basically, he's kind of replaying. He's in his own head, kind of replaying these points in his relationship.
Wait.
What?
I don't know.
What
Just
do
wait.
you want, Joel?
Just wait. I don't know. I want you to wait for just a while.
Okay.
The Charlie Kaufman movie. Really, most of his filmography, it feels like to me sometimes, is this is of a similar vein. So I would say that one, a more recent one, was I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which was I think just a Netflix release. It's kind of of a similar vein. Like the main character kind of has this trip to visit her family with her boyfriend as she's thinking of ending the relationship, and it gets very absurdist kind of, and a lot of it's taking place in her head. So I guess I'm thinking of just movies where the world hasn't necessarily ended, but we're so removed from reality that you can argue it's post-apocalyptic.
Hmm.
Do you agree with the expanding the definition of it? Would you guys consider a movie that is so disorienting? Would you consider that post? Because we hear that the world is all mental sometimes. Like you view the world how you view it. So if we're viewing it through the prism of a character that's not even interacting with anyone.
Oh no, I personally don't view that as post-apocalyptic. It's an interesting concept because for that individual, maybe it is, but I don't view that as falling in the category.
Brandon, I think you're the one that mentioned Civil War to me. Civil War is one of those movies to me that just appeared, while it's happening, it still appears just so unreal. Like this, it's not possible for this to be happening. So it's like I'm in the middle of, I would give it coca tea, because it just feels so unreal. A lot of the events that happened in that film, but that they did indeed happen.
Yeah.
So there's this detachment from reality that went on throughout that movie, throughout the time I was watching that film. And I couldn't get fully invested because this isn't really happening.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because to me, that movie does kind of fall into category I would call post-apocalyptic. And I think part of that is because your reaction to it is because it is so over the top in terms of what's happening. And not to be psychoanalyzing it, but maybe it's a defense mechanism. Your psyche is going, I can't get with this because I don't want to feel like or that this is a possibility.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a total opposite feel from that. And I don't want to get too political or anything like that, but given how much of a divide there has been, I sat there watching Civil War in the theater, and I think it's very well put together, and they did a really good job with the scenes of making you feel like you were there. And I think that helped me feel like it was a more realistic movie. It also very much nods to the political divide in our nation, which again is why I felt like it could be realistic. And so I do think it falls in that post-apocalyptic category.
You don't know what side they're fighting for. Someone's trying to kill us. We are trying to kill them.
I'm trying to stay far away from believing it will happen,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it did sell itself to me as believable.
Yeah,
Yeah, in a very disturbing way.
yes.
Well, it's interesting. It's like where a post-apocalyptic movie is dropping us on the timeline, right? I think most of the ones that come to people's minds, especially the ones that are based on monsters, they seem like kind of far removed, even if it's not in terms of years necessarily, but it seems like a lot happened and then we had zombies and aliens, right? A lot happened, and then this Civil War felt to me like much closer on that timeline where it's like this could happen decades from now, or it could happen next week. Like, and so I think the political division type of post-apocalyptic movie feels very like on the doorstep. It has this very right around the corner element to it.
Another one that feels that way to me is Contagion with Matt Damon, about a mysterious virus that suddenly begins to infect people, and there's no cure for it. There's just no cure for it, and people are suddenly they're suddenly dying. Now, what does that remind you of? It reminds you very much of the pandemic. It reminds you very much of the novel virus that that COVID-19 was anyway. And so while it was done in 2011 and COVID hit us, 8 years later, talk about something on the doorstep. Scary thing is that something like that could indeed happen again. And I don't mean just from a novel virus, but viruses that we have vaccines for, that now are being not considered important because of the political lines that have been drawn. So yeah, that's another. Anyway, I feel that Contagion is another one of those post-apocalyptic films that could indeed, it's realistic. So that's another one.
Is there anyone else who might have had contact with her?
This was everyone.
Aaron Barnes did.
Barnesy worked on another floor.
There were documents she needed to sign. He picked her up from the airport.
He picked her up from the airport?
Yes.
Where is he?
Hello?
Hello? Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
This is Dr. Mears from the Centers for Disease Control. I believe... Hi. I believe you may have had contact with Beth Emhoff last week.
Yeah, I picked her up at the airport. What's this about?
So we can't forget about Terminator in this category.
Yeah.
The interesting thing enough is that the Terminator series is based off of trying to avoid the robot apocalypse, but people forget that there actually was one of those movies that was released after this took place. It was I'm trying to remember what year that was. Terminator Salvation with Christian Bale and Sam Worthington. I think that was 2009. was when that came out, but that's one of them that was set afterwards. But it's the idea that that's something that I think our heads are more willing to wrap ourselves around, because again it distances us from the belief that it's going to happen. Even though
I'm
I
not
do
so
think it's
sure about
possible that
that.
it
Yeah,
could.
very
Another one,
possible. With the advent of AI and whatever rate that it accelerates in terms of, sure, I fully see that as a possibility. Terminator is not that far-fetched. I know a
I'm not
lot of
trying to say
people
it's
feel that
far-fetched.
way. I know a lot of people feel that way, and even probably when the movies came out, you probably had people falling on one side of the fence or the other. That'll never happen, or maybe.
Connor, there's no sign of the machines. They're gone. It's way too quiet. It's almost like they're waiting for us.
I don't think the robots taking over is as far-fetched as people think.
But we also are a family that believes in a lot of technology. And Dad, you have warned us. I remember you being so concerned about viruses hitting my computer when I was going to college that I think that I jokingly feel like my computer may have been more protected than the Pentagon, because you just were adamant that things like that could happen. So I have lived in this reality that sure, it really could happen any day now.
Yeah.
Don't forget about the Matrix is another one that's kind of post-apocalyptic. Remember, the robots took over in that sense. The machine empire
the machine
was in charge. And if you watch the Animatrix, which was supposed to be a part of the total story, it actually it speaks on that piece of the robots being in the homes and how it transitioned from that being acceptable to all of a sudden we kept looking at them as things, but AI taught it to feel. And therefore, once it had fear in its heart that it was going to be eliminated, that's when the entire machine empire rose up to fight against us. So it's laying the blueprint out as to how this could actually happen. And if AI keeps getting better and better, is it really that far-fetched?
Well, remember in the Matrix, there's a scene where Morpheus shows he wasn't calling him Neo at the time, but he shows him what the world he thinks he's living in actually looks like. Remember, he turns on the TV and you just see this kind of desert space.
You've been living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
And so, I mean, that to me right there kind of seals it as a post-apocalyptic movie.
What I think about as we talk about these different films is what is our preoccupation with the apocalypse? I mean, why do we even think about the possibility of the apocalypse?
I feel like there are two things that drive these type of movies in general. And one of them is as humans, we know we have a finite time on Earth. And so we always wonder, will we be alive when the universe ends, or is that the next generation's deal? So I think we're preoccupied with what if during my time is when this comes. And that's one reason why those movies come about. And the second thing is everybody's preoccupation with control. When we think about the apocalypse, it's an event that we cannot control. And I think that is probably the biggest fear everybody has, is when they can't control a situation or the outcome of anything. And so I think those are the two main things that drive movies like these being created.
The timeliness of those movie drops, though, makes me wonder if they have a pulse on that they understand that audiences out there are concerned about what you just mentioned.
Oh, in that sense, I think they take social cues. I really do. I mean, take Civil War, for example. It wasn't far-fetched for me to think about that being realistic, because of
There you
the what's going on in society now. So that movie was made
There
with
you
the
go.
idea of what's been going on today, easily. Think about Armageddon, back when we were big into NASA. I remember every single time when we had the book it program, and every month there was that you could purchase the books through the weekly reader, I think is what it was. There were constantly things on space in there. And so because of our preoccupation with space at that time, it made it easier to make a movie like an Armageddon or other ones, because we were already obsessed with space.
Yeah, I know it was a little bit before we really started talking about AI to the extent that we're talking about it now. But I don't know if you would call this movie one that necessarily falls into the category of post-apocalyptic, but it does set forth the notion of extrapolating to when machines could infiltrate and take over, so to speak. Ex Machina. I mean, that one was an interesting question.
Go back to your room.
If I do, are you ever gonna let me out?
Yes. Stop.
One, could a robot actually convince you to the point that they were human, almost human? And then what happens when one gets out into the world? What happens after that? How does that spread change things?
Maybe another draw is just at least from the hero standpoint, who's going to. I think when people watch it, they view it as like, who is going to save us, right?
Mhm.
Like, who the character that's the hero in the movie, we almost view it as them giving us another chance at life. When you get kind of sucked into this story, that's the way you're watching it, kind of. And I think so. I think it's a little bit character based, and it's easy to. I personally find it a little even easier to get drawn into and relate to and care about the characters, when everything around them has dissipated in a sense. Like it's interesting to think about it kind of juxtaposed to a movie that's take a rom-com or something like that that's based in modern society. If you're not really on board with the characters, you might check out completely, and there's nothing really to draw you back into it. Whereas, with I just think in a post-apocalyptic movie, you're kind of there with them. There's nothing else going on, right? So it's easy to, I think, be drawn into and relate to the characters and have empathy for them. Like to empathize with somebody who's living in a kind of desolate wasteland and in constant danger in a sense. And I think a lot of times we look for ourselves in this movie, like, which character would I be and how would I survive?
Yeah, that's an interesting.
That's very interesting, bro.
I do, and maybe I don't know if we would necessarily classify all these as post-apocalyptic, but it seems like if you go back far enough, these movies weren't. It seems like there was a heavy amount of space travel based or space otherworldly post-apocalyptic movies, like Total Recall. You had Logan's Run. You had Blade Runner. You had like these movies that, I mean, they were kind of had this established society on another planet in a sense. So whether you want to call that post-apocalyptic or not, but it used to seem like that was like a heavy theme back then, in the 80s, maybe even the early 90s, and now it's like the ones we see are I leave monster movies out of it a little bit, zombie and alien movies, because I think that's just meant to appeal to kind of fans of horror movies, right? Like, just whether society is broken down or not, you're going to have fans of horror going to see movies like that. So, but we kind of shifted. It feels like there's less. There's, I think there was one with Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt. We've seen a couple of them, but it seems like that used to be kind of the idea of a society on another planet used to be a common theme, and now we're going into, vaccines and cannibalism and and political division. And I wonder if are these movies meant to reflect just that, the issues of the time? Were we meant to or were what are the space what did all those space travel apocalyptic movies indicate that was in the public conscience? Was that a concern then, that people were, or that we might all be living on Mars soon, and then now we're worried about it? Are we gonna get our shots this week? I'm curious if these movies are meant to be a reflection of social issues or not, or what people think is going to happen. We don't see those anymore, so I'm wondering, do people not think about space travel at all?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, when we're talking about space travel, when I think about post-apocalyptic, the closest thing I can come to is Independence Day, which is appropriate given that this episode is going to debut right as we hit 4th of July. So yeah, the aliens come over and we're trying to save ourselves from annihilation. But nonetheless, yeah, I mean, to your point, Chris, but there aren't that many more space travel ones that speak on the idea of the end of the world. So I'm surprised actually we haven't had more of those.
Interstellar is kind of the last big movie that may fit that bill.
Yeah, probably.
But I was prepared. I knew the theory. Reality's different.
And Miller.
There's nothing here for us.
I mean, historically, films have always had themes built around the social and political issues of the day. And that has been the case for the over a century of filmmaking. So I'm not surprised at all that there were movies, made about US's aspirations for space travel and to live on Mars and all of that, because there was a great deal of talk about it.
I think a lot of the older movies were more about the fears of what's out there and
fears.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I mean, that was the typical to what Chris was talking about. The typical movies associated with that was some alien, be it a single person or an invasion, coming from elsewhere to our planet. And interestingly enough, all of those space travelers that came here, well, I guess they would have to be superior technology-wise, I guess, but they were always more sophisticated in some way. Some of them portrayed them as looking a lot different from us. Some of them they looked just like human beings. So it kind of ran the gamut of whether or not they were lizards or, just people from another planet. But I think I think for the most, ET. I think for the most part, they sort of, I won't say preyed on, but they seized on the notion that we were afraid of being invaded by others and taken over. And I don't think that's too far-fetched from some of the battles here on Earth in that respect. I mean, no, you think about it, there were conquerors and whatnot, nations that tried to conquer the world, so to speak. So I think that whole theme just kind of falls with the whole notion of humankind in and of itself. We sort of projected on aliens the same sort of mentality. We want to take over the world. We want to take over, the planet, an area, whatever, expanding farther and farther. And so, yeah, I think those movies sort of just fed into this notion of the fear of being invaded, taken, and subjugated or whatever.
Yeah, see that I don't buy. I think those are movies that those are horror movies in my view, and they decided to find a way to make a horror movie using a space alien. I think that's what that's totally about. But I think when you look at movies like Total Recall. It's got not, there are aliens in it, but it's got nothing to do with aliens.
Honey, you wouldn't hurt me, would you, sweetheart? Sweetheart, be reasonable. After all, we're married.
Consider that a divorce.
That was your wife? What a bitch.
It has to do with the potential to putting life on Mars. The problem is it has no oxygen. But that's what that movie was about. It was still about, but reaching for it anyway, finding a way to, change that atmosphere in a way that would allow for human life to exist. And I think those are the kinds of movies that were typical. It was not a monster movie by any stretch, but I think the alien stuff is what it is. They're monster movies. It's a chance to show U.S. heroism, that kind of thing.
My tend to lean against. I don't think it's just monster movies, but I, at the same time, agree with you that there was a very big shift away from Hollywood making more space and alien movies after the shift we took away from NASA. And part of the reason why I feel that way, I was trying to think of when was the last space movies I saw that made me feel that way. The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yep.
Was one with Keanu Reeves that was done, I believe, in 2008.
Well,
and then,
was a remake.
it's a remake, but it was remade during that time, not recently. And then War of the Worlds was another big one. Tom Cruise was in that one, and that was another remake, but that was done in 2005. My point being, Mom, is that I agree with you that while you may view them as monster movies, I think they were trying to give us apocalyptic views and the way they were portraying them, and we stopped using space shortly after those two came out.
Yeah, because I was thinking, those are invasion movies, whereas the Total Recall and Logan's Run and Blade Runner, they were kind of about this life on another planet, like it almost as if to suggest either Earth was inhabitable or just undesirable. It was the inferior option to this new world. And so I always look back at those and wondered if that was supposed to be, and obviously the cartoon version of it was the Jetsons, where it's just like, are these films supposed to be some sort of prediction of where we're heading, or just entertainment? Now that we shifted to vaccines and martial law and that kind of stuff, is it, what is the cause behind that, I guess?
Well, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. Thanks so much for listening and figuring out your cup of tea along with us. Honestly, we could go on and on like we do at our dinner table, but we look forward to you joining us again next week for another great discussion. Make sure you rate and follow the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. From your safety shelter, make sure to leave a comment and share your thoughts on the apocalypse. You can stay in the loop on all things COTC by subscribing on our website at cupofteacritiques.com. You can also find us on Facebook, check out our Instagram at Cup of Tea Critiques, and on Letterboxd at COT Critiques. For Reba, Terry, and Chris, I'm Brandon. We'll see you next week for another deep look with a deep brew.